Dozens of reputable witnesses claim to have heard the terrible screams that issued forth from the ghost ship Palatine, just 5 miles off the coast of Rhode Island. John Greenleaf Whittier committed the legend to poetry, and the story of the ghostly ship has found its way into several formal histories of New England. Although the ghostly recreation of the disaster was last officially reported in the 1820s, there are several old-timers in the Block Island area who can relate the details of the phantom ship. The story of the tragic ship Palatine and her final voyage goes back to November 1752, with a full passenger list of immigrants, all bound for the prospering districts around Philadelphia. The vessel set sail from a Dutch port. The immigrants carried everything they possessed with them, for none planned to return to the Old World. The voyage was uneventful until the Palatine reached the vicinity of the Gulf Stream, at which point it seemed as if all the fury of the North Atlantic was hurled upon them. Storm after storm smashed the ill-fated ship, driving her far off course into uncharted seas. The captain had become ill shortly after the Palatine had set out, and the turbulence of the storm soon drove him to his bed. With their captain in quarters, the ship's crew began to slack off. For weeks the little vessel was mauled by the vicious sea, while the crew did little to get her on course. Without their captain to drive them, the seamen stayed below and let the sea rule the Palatine. When the captain died, all hope was lost for the ship's passengers. Ambitious young officers, backed by the crew, seized control of the provisions. To those passengers who could pay their exorbitant prices, the greedy officers doled out meager rations in food and water. Those without money starved to death and were cast overboard. The supplies gave out around Christmas time. The crew took to the lifeboats and abandoned the Palatine and its surviving passengers to the whims of the sea. The vessel drifted for several more days until it finally ran aground on the sandy shoals of Block Island. Most of the surviving passengers left on board had suffered mental breakdowns. Residents of Block Island removed the survivors to the safety of the village homes. One woman had become so crazed by her suffering and by the death of her loved ones that she refused to leave the ship. She maintained that she had to stay aboard to await the return of her family so they could all disembark together. The islanders decided to allow the woman to remain on board and selected a committee that would be responsible for providing her with food and water. The Palatine was towed into a cove, and the villagers planned to salvage any usable cargo and to dismantle the ship at their convenience. Perhaps by that time, they reasoned the poor woman might have regained her senses. One day, while the islanders were working on the Palatine, the ship was blown adrift by a sudden storm. In his haste to leave the ship, one of the workmen accidentally tipped a brazier of coals. Flames began leaping upward from the dry timbers, and the work crew scrambled for their boats. As they rowed toward the shore, the islanders looked back to the Palatine, its deck enveloped in flames. Then the men heard the agonizing screams lifting from the flaming vessel. The daft woman had been left behind. The workmen were filled with shock and pity. They knew the flames were too intense to risk going back to the Palatine. There was nothing they could do for the trapped victim except to offer a prayer for her soul. They watched, horrified, as the rising wind slowly pushed the blazing vessel out to sea. In flames, the Palatine sailed into legend. There are some people in the area who claim that the ship returns every year on the anniversary of her destruction. Others contend that the Palatine came back only as long as any member of her original crew remained alive. Historians found dozens of witnesses who claimed to have seen the image of the burning ship and to have heard the terrible screams of the dying woman. Dr. Aaron Wiley reported having viewed the lights of the Palatine on several occasions. His story exactly paralleled other reports that a blazing fire the size of a ship appears near shore, then slowly recedes until it is only a tiny light on the horizon.